Evening comes in sweater weather, so you know the tiger jumper comes out of the wardrobe. But what came off my bookshelf most recently was Love and Other Thought Experiments by Sophie Ward. A book very much that captivated me based on its... Before I read this, I probably would have said subject matter is based on, but more so the structure of this story is based on philosophy of the mind. Now, if you watch other reviews, if you read other reviews, they're going to use this phrase, philosophy of the mind. And I think before we even tackle this, let's actually talk about what philosophy of the mind in a nutshell, ever so briefly. Philosophy of the mind is split up into two parts, dualism and monoism, which really have to deal with, is the mind and the body one entity or two? That is the mind operated on its own level, or is the body as a whole operated on one level? Those two major schools, dualism and monoism, are really interested in the human experience, consciousness, if you will. Again, this is very brief, but one person who knows her stuff is Sophie Ward, who has a PhD in philosophy, which is exhilarating because we have someone who understands the theory, understands the texts, and is able to manipulate them to create the novel which we see today. And what we are dealing with are more the latter part, the thought experiments. Yes, this book is split into 12 chapters, with each subsequent chapter dealing with its own individual thought experiments for which the narrative is to be told. Out of the 12 thought experiments, we come across ones such as the prisoner dilemma. We have ones such as what Mary do. We have probably one of the biggest, I would argue, which is how the story starts, is Pascal'S Wager, which is all about trying to understand, should you put your faith in a god knowing that you don't know the answer? You might be scratching your head thinking, I don't know any thought experiments, and I don't know the ones that you've just talked about. Do not worry. Helpfully, you have the thought experiment here. We have it in its own writing, and who it's by, with some other supplementary text to go along with it. And by having that, you are primed going into the chapter to see what Sophie Ward is doing in order to tell her narrative. So we open the book, start to understand what Pascal is trying to say, and we kickstart into the story, which is highlighted on the back of the book. Yes, the one on the synopsis, about someone who has an ant in their eye, and their partner does not believe them. And when we finish that chapter, we sit down, we reflect, and we are introduced to a new thought experiment and a new story. Wash, repeat, wash, repeat. The story, therefore, is interlinked, interwoven. Sometimes we work backwards on ourselves, sometimes going back to previous events to see them from an entirely new perspective, one that would be right behind our eye, so it seems. All you really need to know is that Eliza and Rachel and their child Arthur are really the main players, the cogs that keep this narrative alive. It's also worth mentioning there is a prologue and an epilogue, but I don't know if you can call them as such. They kind of work outside of the narrative and is itself talking about a thought experiment of, if you can imagine a type of blue that doesn't exist, is it in any way fact real or unreal? It doesn't really play into the main story arc, but it's there. I don't really know what the point of that was, and I'm gonna say I'm not really sure what this book is, which is a bit of a shame because I really wanted to like this, but really, if you boil this down, these are reimaginings of thought experiments. But you already have been told the thought experiment prior to going into the reimagining. Okay, so is it a retelling? Is it a recreation? More so, it's a rehash of these thought experiments that you were told prior to what they are, and then in a modern setting, it's some slightly bizarre, slightly quirky galactic adventures that we go on. They try to they're trying to tell us something about our current state. Oh, for me, this doesn't work. This story does not work because you're primed at the beginning of what the story's going to revolve around, what it's going to explore. You could nothing is unexpected in some way. Let's take chapter 1, Pascal'S Wager. Okay, so you have infinite possibilities to understand, does God exist? And you already have finite amount of time. Pascal says it's best to have your finite time and put all your effort into worshipping a god, because even if God doesn't exist, you would have infinite happiness. That's a very layman's way of putting it, but go with me. So when the characters end up in the happiest place in the world, Disneyland, it's just a bit kitsch. And there's quite a few moments where that happens, such as Hal, who you realise is only given that name because in one of the thought experiments, he's kind of like named as like the computer on a ship, which is just like it's not even like a clever reference to 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's like you give him that name just to fit the story. It's not that this book screams obvious. I don't want it to come across that way, but more so it's kind of like having like a house tour and the estate agent just pointed at everything going, yeah, that's the stairs, that's the stairs. I told you there was going to be a stairs, and that's the stair gate because you could fall down. Remember I said that they had 2 sofas? Well, they got one, but it's a reclinable. So that's interesting. That's a bit different to what I told you. That's kind of how I feel. It just feels like I was just pointed around going, hey, you see how you see what I'm doing? You see that thing? This chapter? It's there. Because I told you about that part. It's in, do you see it? It's in this, it's here. That's in there. And that's basically how I found this book. Also, I don't think it helps that the story that they start with, the one they stick on the back to kind of like really like lasso you in, it is the best one. It is the best one. And even when you have the story from the perspective of the ant in the eye, you're kind of like, ah, okay. I know this part's only going to be applicable for those who have read it. Now, yes, this is philosophy of the mind. Yes, you're going to have to relinquish some of your principles, some of your beliefs, some of your preconceptions on the world and parallel universes, but you really have to kind of drop everything at some parts to think that what could happen would impact the characters in such a way, in such like in these like odd scenarios. And I don't think the story that this cover's based on is remotely close, like remotely close to the thought experiment, like at all. Like, yeah, kind of. There's kind of this like, it's in here. I don't think it works for me, but last night it clicked. If you like Ali Smith, you will have a feast with this novel. Things that Ali Smith does and repeats in her work, and how she like creates a story is I'm happy to say this, quite similar to how Sophie Ward is going about crafting this. I just didn't get anything from it. Like, is this meant to be really about love? Is it really meant to be about how we exist, how we experience, how we connect to other human beings, and how we want to like be one in the world? I don't know. Like, not at all. The thought experiments are the most interesting thing in this book, but guess what? Someone else had written those. Go and read some philosophy of the mind. Though the story's interlinked and interwoven, they do at times feel as though they are short stories in themselves. And the only issue with having that is that some of them are really strong the first chapter only. Again, the only thing that kind of kept this interested is these odd settings and situations that the characters find themselves in. But they don't find themselves in. They're just placed in there. They're just kind of like puppets. They just kind of like just do as they're told. So it's not as if like there's consequence to actions, because we're just situated somewhere and there you go, believe me. And I don't believe that this book is anything more than a rehash of the 12 thought experiments that I was already primed with the knowledge. This book is a 1 out of 10. I got nothing from it. I got absolutely nothing from it. I didn't like the writing. I don't. Had this not been on the Book of 2020 long list, I would have given up after the 4th chapter. I would have gone, I've had enough, this is it. But no, I read every single page, I read every single one, and the ending is so... The ending is that cliche thing where at the end it's this whole, but it's all the same story. Oh, I hate that. What is it? I need to find it. I'm rereading it. I'm just hating it. This whole notion that, okay, if you put it in like a crappy sci-fi or a silly fantasy, maybe you'd get away with it. But there's loads of parallel universes and they're all on the same course. It's like, what are you telling me? Why have you like stuck this in? I wasted my time and I really wanted to like the book, and I just feel like annoyed that I've sat through something that made me groan, that made me grunt, that just made me go... Like, at one point I just contemplated being like, should I just read all the 12 thought experiments? Because that's it. It's a rehash.